Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I guess it depends on when you guys are watching this. Welcome to POLSC 2303, Introduction to International Relations. Once again, I am your professor, Professor Wes Jamison. We are going to be talking about what is international relations, and we're doing a voiceover on some PowerPoint presentations that I have, and I'm hoping this works for you guys. Let me know. Give me some feedback in the comment section or write me an email. Let's see if this works for you guys, okay? When we're talking about what is IR and how it is studied, one of the questions that I want you to focus on, one of the questions I want you to think about while we're going through this lecture is, what region or regions of the world is the biggest threat to U.S. security? I know recently we've had some issues with North Korea, but last year it was also Syria and Russia, and the year before that it was Iran. And constantly in the background of all of this is this immigration crisis that's going on in Europe. How does this affect our country? And does it affect our security, our stability? Anyways, it's one of the things I want you to think about, because this will be one of the questions or one of the prompts you can choose, okay? So IR revolves around one of the biggest problems that we have is this idea of scarcity. We have all these goods, but not enough to feed everybody, not enough to make everybody happy, right? So how do we spread around goods and services to everybody while also taking care of ourselves, right? So this refers back to the collective action / goods problem, okay? Now, this is the problem of how to provide something that benefits all members regardless of what each member contributes to it. Now, connected to this is this idea of the free rider problem, okay? A free rider is somebody who takes these goods and services without necessarily earning them, okay? Now, it's much easier to solve the free rider problem in small groups because these free riders are exposed. In large groups, they're able to hide amongst the crowd, okay? So the collective action goods problem / free rider problem occurs in all groups and societies, but in IR we see it a lot because each state is sovereign. That means that nobody can control what they do for policy, economics. Other countries can't control us. This is completely up to them. So you can also find this definition in your book. This will be important because this will most certainly be a test question, okay? And we should have a new slide coming up here pretty soon, I believe. Hopefully. All right, good. Sorry. So this is an example of the collective action problem. We have a bunch of people trying to get across a desert, not just any desert, the Sahara Desert. You could very easily die if you tried walking across it. So what do? They have one truck. They load up the truck with all their goods, all their belongings, and then they climb on top of it, right? And you can even see one of the questions I have was who was taking this picture to begin with, and are they being left behind? But you can see that even the guys up top are having a little fun with it, and there are definitely some guys that are cheesing pretty hard right there. All right, so 3 basic solutions to the collective action problem: dominance, reciprocity, and identity. We're going to go through each one, and while we're doing this, I want you to think about maybe some advantages of one and perhaps the disadvantages of them as well. And because this will certainly also probably be a test question, all right? So the first principle, dominance, okay? This revolves around the hegemon, okay? Now the hegemon can be thought of as the biggest, baddest guy with the biggest stick who can bend wills with his mind, you know? So he's definitely the strongest bully on the block. Now, in the international relations community, that's us. That is the United States. We have the strongest military in the world. We have the strongest economy in the world. The most powerful military and the most powerful economy because, number one, for the military, we provide so much more money than any of the other countries all right? Probably more than the next 10 combined, okay? Now, for the economy, we have the most powerful economy in the world because we spend so much money on goods. As you can see in this graph, we are far and away more powerful than any other nation. If you look, especially at this very small blue block at the bottom, China, now while they have a lot of people, as you can see by how wide it is, they do not nearly make as much money as we do. But there are some predicting by 2050 they will be the #1 economy in the world, followed by India, not far behind them. They also have a lot of people, but not making a lot of money. Now, the second core principle to solving the collective action problems is reciprocity. Okay, so reciprocity, it revolves around this idea of you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back, right? Or negatively, or conversely so, would be eye for an eye, okay? So, this could work in trade relations, right? If you trade with me, I'll trade with you, and then you'll see your economy grow. These collective action problems will be somewhat solved. It could also work against you if you think about it in terms of, I'm going to build a missile, and then you're going to build 2 missiles, and since you built 2 missiles, I have to build 4 missiles. So this idea of treating one like you'd want yourself to be treated, this forms the basis of most of our international norms. Now, all norms mean is habits and expectations, okay? It's what we've come to expect from having these kind of relationships with other countries. When we're talking about trading, for example, right? So it could be a good thing. As if we look at China, back in 2001, they joined the WTO. Now that's the what was the WTO? World Trade Organization. Sorry. And then, so they joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, and what happens? You know, it takes a little bit of time, but what ends up happening is their trade just starts to explode. Okay, so now that they've got this exploding trade, they're starting to push out other manufacturing countries, like the United States, for example. We no longer can compete with them. The identity principle is the third solution to the collective action problem, and essentially it says that people using this principle will not rely on self-interest. Instead, they will rely on the community for which they're a part of. Okay, so they will back the community entirely. It's completely a lack of self-interest. Now, can you think of any negatives that could be associated with this identity principle? In this slide, which will also be extremely important for the test, I've kind of broken down the advantages and disadvantages of each one of these principles. For instance, with dominance, the United States is the hegemon, and we provide order, stability, and predictability for the rest of the world. But you also see that there's a lot of people that resent the United States. In the second of these, reciprocity, yes, trade is good and it helps solve a lot of economic problems, especially free trade, but there's also could be this idea of arms races. And for identity, yes, you sacrifice for the group. It's all about the community. But what if you're not a part of the community? What if you're in the so-called quote-unquote out group? Then you would receive absolutely no help from these communities. And this is a very tribal way of thinking. We saw this a lot in early America with the Native Americans. Moving on. IR is a field of study, okay? So just basics about IR. It is interdisciplinary, okay? Now, we're going to be talking about a few of these disciplines within IR. So that's economics, history, sociology. It may even revolve around psychology. And the thing is, it's a mix of conflict and cooperation in relationships among countries, right? So it's going to revolve around all of these things. But when we talk about it, we have to talk about who these actors are and what they want, okay? So, actors, we know that there is actors. What do they want? Well, they all have different preferences, right? And their incentives guide their preferences, all right? So the one thing we have to think about them, if they have incentives and they have preferences, then they have to be rational, okay? So when we talk about rationality, we have to talk about this idea of rational choice. It means that you have a ranking and ordering of your preferences. That you have 1 is better than 2, 2 is better than 3. Now, everybody prefers to, like, let's say, stay in power, not die, make sure you have food, right? Now, people rank these things in a way, but some people also have preferences in which, like, for instance, Mr. Kim Jong-un here, he would like to make sure that he stays in power, right? So, is he rational for lobbing missiles towards our general direction across our allies' nose? Yes, he is. He would be considered rational because we have to ask ourselves what has happened to him every time he does this. And the answer is nothing. Nothing. Nothing happens to him. He still remains in power. And as a matter of fact, he ends up even more powerful because he's shown us that he's capable of so much more. So what do we do as a nation? Well, when the country did this to Clinton, when the country did this to W. Bush, when the country did this to Obama, and now to Trump, we've just consistently backed down and given him food and fuel to essentially pacify him and, keep him from, quote unquote, acting up. Okay? So now, let's ask, who are these actors that have preferences and rationality? So the first thing and the biggest one we talk about is states, okay? Now I'm not talking about Texas, I'm not talking about Oklahoma, I'm not talking about Florida, I'm talking about nation states, like the United States, or Canada, or Mexico, or Russia. What they want is security. They want to know that they're going to be around in the future. And in order to secure that security, they need power, because power is what will enforce them from being acted upon, okay? Some states want a certain ideology. The United States, for example, we care about democracy, and we care about free trade and capitalism. Whereas, Saudi Arabia, they care about Sharia law and maintaining a pretty stiff theocracy. Some states want legitimacy. The newest state to our international community, South Sudan, they were just formed in 2014, and what they want is they want to be seen as a legitimate state. Now, they've been attending meetings of the UN. I mean, they're setting up a political process, but there are many that still see them as a fledgling state trying to make it. Now, at any point, they could crumble. So this fight for legitimacy goes on, right? All right. Now, the next actor that we're talking about is politicians, okay? Now, when we talk about politicians in IR, we only mean one politician, and that is the leader of the country, okay? Now, politicians only want one thing. That's to resecure their power and get reelected. Why? Well, because it's very profitable to be in power. If we look at the last 5 U.S. presidents, with all of them except for maybe H.W. Bush, the top 1% income share has increased under their power. That means that they've gotten more wealthy as they've been in power. Another actor we talk about is bureaucracies, okay? These are often agencies within the government. We're talking about the Department of Defense, the State Department, Department of the Treasury. And what they want is they want to maximize their budget, right? If they're given a budget of $1 million and they only spend 80% of it, that means next year they're only going to get $800,000. They have to spend every bit they're given in order to receive the exact same amount next year. They're also interested in influence. They want the ear of the president. They want the ear of Congress. They want to be able to bend their will to these people. The next is multinational corporations. One of my favorite actors in IR. They are only concerned about one thing, that is profit. When we think of MNCs, we're thinking about things like Google, McDonald's, maybe even ExxonMobil or BP. We can see that over the last 100 years, it may have started pretty slow for them, but you can see after 1990 with the invention of the internet that business began to boom. When they found that they could sell their products without actually having to go somewhere and be somewhere, then they were able to make a lot of money. A lot of money. The next actor we have is IOs. Okay, these are international organizations. Now, what are we talking about when we're talking about international organizations? We are talking about the UN, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. The UN is the United Nations. You know, the World Bank. Now, these international organizations, what do they want? Well, they want what the states want, right? Now, there's nations that are a part of these organizations. Now, the most powerful nations in the organization, they're going to wield all the power, right? So if we're talking about the United Nations, for example, now, the United Nations headquarters is located in New York, right? The United States gives more to the United Nations than any other nation. So of course, they get whatever the United States wants. NGOs, non-governmental organizations. We're talking about Doctors Without Borders. We're talking about, Greenpeace. They often want moral, ideological policy shifts and goals. But do they not also care about profit? A lot of them claim to be non-profit, right? Well, this is a headline from NPR in 2014. The Red Cross CEO has seriously been misleading about where donors' dollars are going. So after the earthquake in Haiti, the CEO of Red Cross claims that 91 cents out of every dollar is going to the victims. Well, after an investigation by NPR, they find out that only about 57 to 60% of every dollar is going to the victims. Where's the other money going? Maybe into the pockets of the CEO. Turns out a lot of it's actually going to advertising for the Red Cross, which doesn't exactly seem like it should be a non-profitable organization. Lastly, we're talking about non-state actors, right? And what are we talking about? Terrorism. Okay, this will include like ISIS and or Al-Qaeda and or Hezbollah. And, are they seeking ideological change? Maybe. Are they seeking profit? Sure. Political change? Who knows? The thing is, we don't know because we don't have a clear grip on their power structure, their hierarchy. We have no idea really what goes on aside from these incredibly well-produced YouTube videos that they seem to be putting out every few years. So this slide is going to be very important for the test. It kind of breaks down all the actors and what we were talking about over the last few minutes. Make sure that you study it. Make sure that you pay attention to it. Take notes. Okay, so moving on to levels of analysis, right? In IR, we take all these things like influences, actors, processes, and we categorize them into 4 different levels of analysis, right? We want to be able to break this down to help us communicate this to people, right? So the first level we look at is the global level. It's the biggest level. It's going to cover essentially the entire globe with no borders, right? What we're looking at here is terrorism, which affects us all, environmental disasters, which may affect us all. We're looking at telecommunications, which can connect anybody to anybody across the world. Next is interstate level, and this is where we talk about wars. We're looking at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 countries maybe, but we're talking about still states fighting, right? When we're talking about treaties and trade agreements, right? Like between different states. Next, we have the domestic level. Now, this is whatever happens inside a state, okay? We're talking about nationalism, like not too long ago we saw in Charlottesville. We're talking about if there's a dictator, right? We're talking about, gender quotas and economic sectors inside a particular country. Lastly, we talk about the individual level, which talks about the leaders, perhaps how long they're staying in power, how they're staying in power, if they were assassinated, how they're treating their public. Moving on, another topic we have in IR is globalization, okay? Now, there's 2 views to globalization, all right? The first view is it's the fruition of liberal economic principles. Now, what that means is free trade. Liberal economic principles is essentially free trade, no borders. We want to be able to trade with everybody. Now, scholars credit the global marketplace for a strong economic growth throughout the entire world since liberal economic principles have held, but only to those who have chosen to integrate into it. One country that hasn't, North Korea. There are also those skeptical about globalization, Now, we can see this because of the Brexit vote, that not all countries are integrated. And some choose to leave the global market. And then there's also this idea of the North and the South being divided economically and by population. And this is an idea that we're going to get into in the next couple slides. Okay? I think it should move right now. It's coming. Promise. All right, here we go. Yes, North-South Gap, right? So it's probably the most important geographical element in the global level of analysis, right? So the North consists of North America, which, United States, Canada, Mexico, Western Europe, and Japan, right? And you probably throw South Korea in there as well as Russia. Russia is also part of the North. And as far as the South, we have Latin America, Africa, South America, Middle East, and probably the majority of Asia. Now, this book or this concept also has China in this South, right? They've not quite reached the level of the westernized states. So essentially, what this is asking is, why are so many of the states in the North so industrialized and rich, and why are the states in the South so poor? Could this be because of, I don't know, education? Could it be because of environmental concerns? Could it be because of the way maybe the North treats their women compared to the way the South treats the women of their society? How they treat children? The amount of pollution that we see? The amount of advancement that could go on in a society? This picture of the globe is pretty interesting because it shows you everything inside that red line is considered the South. Everything outside of it is considered the North. Here are some numbers to just kind of break down that divide even further. If we look at population, for instance, of North America versus China, China has 450 million people more than North America. But the average Chinese person makes $10,000 a year, whereas the average person in North America makes $46,000 a year. That is a huge disparity. And this next slide will kind of break it down even simpler to try and help us. And this next slide this is the one you want to focus on for the test, right? So population, total population of the world. The North, 20% of the total population of the world. The South, 80% of the total population in the world. But if we look at GDP per capita, $33,000 is what the average person makes in the North. That's versus $7,000 in the South. That's crazy. Okay, so we don't have a lot of time left. I just wanted to remind you guys, all right, I need a one-page paper based on some of these ideas and also the readings. Make sure that you cite the readings that I'll be posting for you too. And, if you can find something online, that would also be good. Now, I need you guys to choose one of these two prompts to talk about one-page paper. The first prompt is explain whether or not you, as an IR scholar, view the leader of North Korea as rational and why you feel this way. The second prompt, explain the greatest threat to the United States in terms of the international community and why you feel this way. Okay? Now, the paper's going to be emailed to me by midnight on Friday, September 8th. I hope you guys found this format useful. It was a little daunting for me, but I think I got it figured out, and I'm hopefully getting better at it. I want you guys to have a great week, and I can't wait to read your papers.